through the Happy Valley. We slept that night by a small river outside Taos. Albuquerque didn't work out. The next morning we hiked up into the ski valley further north of town. We made it to a spot that takes your sense of balance away. In parentheses, if your sense of balance is precarious the way mine is anyway. In parentheses. Way up on a rock ridge that marks the southern boundary of the ski area. The view wasn't all around us one. In every direction was a snowed over peak, held in place by the wide shoulders of a thick valley of pines. Aspens, Ernie tells me. We even saw a few fresh ski tracks in a rocky chute nearby and some big paw cat tracks leading up from the base of the ski lift to a small cave. The next day was Saturday. We stayed put in Taos our second day in any one location, waiting for forgetful Abe's boots to arrive at the post office. By then, already a day late catching up from the chateau in New Orleans. All in all, he'd been more quiet than usual since he remembered them on the bed in the hotel room. Bad luck, he insisted. Bad luck to have Abe around, Bad luck to have Abe around, insisted Ernest on cue. On our first day in Taos, I stood in the middle of the Gorge Bridge, outside town in a strong wind, 650 feet above the Rio Grande. I leaned over the rail and imagined all the rubber band jumpers that had surely visited the spot before me. If it were me, and it probably wouldn't be, there I'd sit dangling on the end of the thing. There I'd sit dangling on the end of the thing, slowing to a gentle bounce as the real fear set in. If I had a good voice, I might have sung a song that day, feeling just a little bit better than I did the day before. In Ouray, Colorado, we hiked to the top of a 4-mile switchbacking path that ended, and presumably still ends, at Cascade Falls. Just past the keystone, the triangular rock that divides the flow of water into two main gushes, the path continues along the rim of the valley wall to an old mining cabin. The seemingly abandoned structure was wedged into the side of the mountain and propped up by stilts under the downhill edge. Inside were a few thousand initials, dates, and dedications. On the far wall was a 6-foot cast iron stove, no doubt much heavier and sturdier than the old floorboards underneath. I stood against the uphill side of the room for a little while, reading the walls and ceiling beams, looking for Jenny's and my initials, just in case. Moody still twists the stem off apples to an alphabet count, sticking the stem through the skin just when he needs to. He still cheats, yes. Stuff this important can't be left to chance. Ernie popped into the room breathing heavily. He looked around fast and then located a clear spot on the back wall. He went to work with Abe's car keys. He got 6 letters up on the wall quickly, but then got tired or lost interest. Dan Moo. The keys weren't sharp enough to finish, he explained. Why not your name, dickhead? I thought you'd appreciate it. Moo? He stepped back and laughed a little. My hands are tired. Finish it yourself if you want. Ernie jumped back out into the narrow trail and joined Abe back at the waterfall. Dan Moo left his mark as is, where it can probably still be found, and followed his friend Ernest out into the bright sunlight. Soon thereafter, a very attractive blonde woman showed up, not from the top of the trail that brought the boys there, but down through the trees and boulders above the falls. She looked 35, maybe 28, dressed in jogging gear and sweating lightly. The woman bent down to the river above the falls and splashed water on her face, and then rubbed some on her forearms and neck, which were all as tight and sinewy as the rest of her body, especially her calves and thighs. When she stood up, she spoke. Hey kids, what took you so long? What? Ernie whispered, almost frantically. Who's she talking to? He looked around sharply. Is she talking to us? Then we heard the footsteps, small scuffing footsteps, and when I turned to look at the path behind us, 4 wiry blonde children appeared. 10 or 12 minutes later, Mom came over and talked with us. She said she was in town for a big statewide amateur swim meet. We told her about our trip for a minute, where we've been, where we might go, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite. Then Abraham announced that he had an old friend from Choate he wanted to go visit, living with the Arapahoes and the Shoshones on some big reservation in Wyoming. Ernie immediately said no chance. Wow, the East Coast, the woman began. I've never been there. Actually, I've never been east of Colorado, but I did go to Los Angeles once. I hated it, so I came back. Then she leaned down over our backs, and I was about to lose it with the close proximity when she pointed out hot springs at the far end of town, just under our toes. Ouray, a town no bigger than a good-sized pond. In the morning it was Sunday, and we drove to Telluride for the last day at the Bluegrass Festival. I was still tired, tad hungover, and each mile of road seemed to pull me farther and farther from familiar elevations. I was halfway out my window, grabbing huge breaths of air, taking in all the countless vistas as best I could, as we twisted our way into the heart of Colorado's snow country. In Telluride, the Kirkorish town where Ernie said he was thinking about moving to for the ski season, it was clear that most of the people came from somewhere else, somewhere far away. Veggie burritos abounded, and kids everywhere leaned against their backpacks as they ate them, stretched out under the towering snow-covered peaks and technicolor hillsides, laser-coated lenses, orange marmalade hacky sacks, dirty roped hair, and unisex sundresses. Everyone pretty, everyone sleepy, and everyone a little gritty, way up around 9,000 feet high as a kite above sea level. And we ambivalently heard no bluegrass music. 3 hours before the end of the festival, they were still asking $25 at the entrance to the town park. I hadn't even spent $25 in the 3 days leading up to Telluride. Who needs that preppy hillbilly shit anyhow, said Ernie. Come on, let's go watch the Bulls game. I'm going for a walk, Abe said. And he split. Have fun, Abraham. This seems like your kind of town, Ernie said, as Abe stepped out onto Colorado Avenue and crossed to the north side. Ernie and I ate a quick lunch at Baked and Brewed in Telluride, briefly facing east on their dark afternoon porch. Afterwards, we walked up the slight hill on the side street and across Colorado Avenue to the Steaming Bean for coffee. There was a mob on the sidewalk spread around on a few benches and a 20-foot stretch of curb, doing absolutely, positively nothing. Lots of dogs also, big dogs, mountain dogs. And there was a line almost out the door, more a pack really, making access to the counter difficult, if not unlikely. So we walked farther down the sidewalk and up a flight of wooden stairs to an out-of-place sports bar, where we watched Michael Jordan win his 3rd straight NBA championship. On this tiny town's most crowded day of the year, someone lamented to us. There was just a handful of people in the sports bar watching easily twice as many TVs. After the game, we stepped to the street, wondering how we were going to find Abe, but instead he found us. He called to me from one of the benches in front of the coffee shop. He had a bunch of girls around him. He pushed himself to his feet, kissed 2 of them, and then flagged down the shuttle bus that took us out to the parking fields. Ernie drove us out Colorado's back door into Utah. 3 or 4 hours later, Ernie pulled the truck into a sand parking lot sheltered from a dry desert wind by 2 big trees and fortified line of RVs. We were in Moab. I wrestled with one of the collapsing tent poles for a minute or two while the other two emptied the back of the vehicle. We slept until well after sunrise. I was apparently the last one awake. Ernie and Abe were dressed and eating fresh Telluride cherries and talking quietly and leaning against the picnic table. "Oh, you," Ernie said, with a pause to spit out a pit, as I crawled out of the tent, exhausted from the hard dirt sleeping. "Let's go." "Shotgun," I called, quite cleverly, I thought. "Jesus, do you ever stop?" Abe complained. "Why can't you sit in back for once?" "All is fair in love and road trips, Abe," Ernie offered as he rocked himself forward and walked to the truck. Abe turned and put the twisty back on the chairs. "That's not really what I asked, now is it?" he said. "But don't worry about it." "Abe, I sat in back all through." I tried to remember. "I said don't worry about it, lover boy." "Not in the front, he won't," Ernie added. "Just drive you," Abe said to Ernest. "Right, I'll drive and you'll slide around in the back." Ernie laughed. "Take shotgun, Abe," I told him. "No thanks, Dan. It really belongs to you, really." "I'm serious. If you want to take it, I'll stretch out in the back." "God, you're an ass sometimes," Ernie said to one of us. I wasn't sure which. "Just close the door, Dan." "Fine," I exclaimed. I closed the door and Ernie drove the truck through Moab out into canyon lands. Fast. It was Monday morning and the music was up loud. For a few minutes on the sunburned highway, I forgot that it wasn't just me and Ernie. It made me grin a bit, no doubt foolishly. I looked around to place Abe in the situation, but I didn't see him. The seat was down and the bags were pushed to the sides. A long towel was covering something running up the middle. And at the way back, I saw Abe's blue pillow and a tuft of jet black hair. I turned back to the road ahead, and then Ernest, and then to my road again, and then to the road again. I looked in the side view mirror, pulled down on my cheeks, and then rubbed my eyelids with my fingers. I fumbled through the glove compartment for my sunglasses. Ernie asked me what I was looking for and then took them off my head and handed them to me, all while looking forward. "These sunglasses?" "Thanks." I took the shades from his hand and looked at the lenses from all sides, scratched to hell and cheap to begin with. I tossed them up on the dash. Then we were driving, myself with vague, intangible thoughts of the world dropping out from underneath us at any minute. An uneasiness was circling through my body, doing crazy turns in my bloodstream, but advancing slowly and steadily in concentric circles out from the base of my spine. The feeling you would get in a huge wingless airplane just before the end of a treacherous 9-mile runway. A monstrous disaster movie in the making. I was genuinely nervous about us missing a key canyon road sign. After our safe descent into Canyonlands National Park, a man who could have been Picasso passed us in an open Jeep Renegade on the road out into the backcountry, with a tan, bald head and an open Bermuda shirt exposing a dark, stout belly. "Hollywood's here, fellas," he said, shaking his head. "Fucking Hollywood." He pulled his Jeep back into the road behind us and disappeared. Around a bend, the secret was revealed, inappropriately, without modesty. Lined up were some 20 charcoal gray trailers. One of them had a big Geronimo painted on the side. Next to the trailers were 2 3-ring circus tents, and next to the tents were 100 horse trailers, filled with maybe twice as many horses. All about were men in cavalry and Indian outfits. Ernie said he saw Gene Hackman standing by the door to one of the trailers. There was a turnoff to the lot, just where the red dirt road went the other way. The 2 guys working the driveway standing out in the great open with thick crossed arms and well-gelled hair, shook their glistening heads and pointed in the direction we had been heading. Ernie leaned out the window and told them that they would never work in this town again. I was driving. Abe leaned out, shook his head once to the side of Ernie, and silently pointed out that we were down to a quarter tank. 30 miles further south, we found a girl, 17 or 18 maybe, holding a stop sign. Shithead jumped out and jogged up to her with his very deliberate running back's warm-up stride, slow, wide stance, concentrating on foot placement. He pulled up and said something that made the girl smile. Then she nodded and he handed her an apple I didn't know he had. It was by then excruciatingly hot inside the car, right under the windshield where the sun was slamming down on my legs. 10 minutes passed before the pace car showed up. It did a partially off-road U-turn and then escorted us 2 miles down the Redland Highway. The yellow dashes up the middle were clearly fresh and the wind had smeared them a bit at the crests of 2 slight hills. The driver of the painting truck pulled another U-turn and waved us by. There was another young girl with a stop sign, not nearly as cute as the first one, and a line of 5 or so cars waiting for their turn to go north. We set up our 11th camp way out into the Needle section of Canyonlands by a dried-up creek bed, and it wasn't at all cold out. But I collected armfuls of bone-dry wood anyway, there was so much of it, and built a raging fire all over the place. Out of nowhere, the wind had picked up, and for a few long minutes, we were genuinely afraid we'd lit the whole park on fire. "Christ, Moody," Ernie began. "What the hell were you thinking?" He was sweating like a pig, and pretty surprisingly. I told him to get over it, and then stripped down to the summer skivvies to go to bed. Overnight, the temperature dropped to about 20 degrees. At 4 in the morning, I sprinted to the truck for jeans and a long-sleeve shirt. Once dressed, I rubbed my forearms a bit and then stopped. I was looking around. The little canyon we were in was unbearably noiseless, soundless. Instead of going back to the tent, I climbed into the passenger seat of Abe's truck and closed the door, gently. I rummaged through the tapes at my feet until I found the Mozart mix. I went back to the tent for the ignition key and then sat mostly still for several hours, watching the strange moonlit landscape, patiently waiting for the sun to arrive, and working out further logistics for a rendezvous with my young woman poet. This was as far west as we would get that week. The next day we turned north. The vote was 2-1 to skip the deeper, grander canyons further southwest for the sake of the higher, cooler country above us. Flaming Gorge, the Tetons, Yellowstone. Who knows, I wondered. Maybe even Thermopolis in middle western Wyoming. I had been studying our maps. Thermopolis, home to the largest hot spring in the world, the guidebook read. If Abe gets his Indian reservation, then maybe I can get my Thermopolis. If we went up the west side of Wyoming to Yellowstone, and then swung out east, and from there down to the Shoshone-Arapaho Indian reservation that Abe wants us to visit, then Thermopolis could be right on the way. I would present my new proposal over breakfast. The next chapter is Adventures in the Peace Park.